Crazy Stupid Podcast.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. And as always, if this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the bell button, the like button, and the subscribe button so that you are aware of when we post things.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. Happy Valentine's Day. Well, we're recording it on Valentine's Day. You won't see it on Valentine's Day. I hope you enjoyed your time. If it was a Galentine's, a Valentine's, you know, men.
What's a Galentine's?
When like your girlfriends get together and you like celebrate Valentine's Day together.
Oh.
But men should have an equivalent of that.
It's called playing 2K. Side note, I saw something that was actually fucking hilarious. This person was like, if you're in a situationship, please leave February 14th alone. Your day is April 1st.
No. Well, I hope that everybody had a wonderful time, or you're going to celebrate this weekend as we are, because Wednesday night.
Hell no, I just got home from I guess work and PT.
Yeah, it's not happening. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the movie Dune. That's the one. Directed by Denis Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve.
I think that's how you say it. Apologies if we're mispronouncing it.
Yeah.
Please let us know in the comment section.
They will. But yes, tell us if we're pronouncing it wrong, although we did just look it up.
Literally just pulled up the YouTube page.
I still think that its portrayal of colonialism and the implications of like where the story is going with its analogy, I still appreciate quite a bit. And I think it's all extremely, extremely relevant. And there's like layers and layers to it. Some of which feel like, honestly, like a little before it is time. Because like, to me, there's like climate change layers to this. I don't even know if Frank Herbert knew where he was going with it.
I think he did. The book seems to explore a lot.
And somebody did say that he did like ecology. So he probably, maybe he was like, because they probably were already talking about it just in like smaller sciencey circles. So one of the things that I noted was the character of Leto, Paul's dad. Spoiler alert, he's no longer alive in the franchise. So there's a scene at the beginning where like they very clearly try to establish Leto as like a good person. Like when he's talking to Paul before they go, and like they're kind of establishing it in like two ways. One is like how he's a good person as a father, because Paul is talking to him and Paul is basically expressing like doubt about, you know, inheriting this legacy and, you know, kind of taking up the mantle after his father and being like, you know, what if I don't really want to do this? And where another patriarchal figure in another film probably would have been like, this is your duty and you must, you know, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't do that. He tells him, even if you turn it down, you'll still be all I ever needed you to be, which is my son. Yeah. So they establish him as like, yes, he's a strong patriarchal figure. Very clearly, this is like a patriarchal society. But he is, you can see like he is kind and loving and just in how he treats both his son and not his wife, apparently. Yeah. But the woman in his life. And then in that same conversation, they start talking about going to Arrakis. And he basically says like, you know, the Harkonnen were there and they were there as dominators. Like they came and they tried to dominate the Fremen people. And he says that he wants to like form an alliance with the Fremen and collaborate with them. So like they're very early on establishing him as like a baseline good person, right? Like he seems trustworthy. He seems like a good leader. He seems like a kind-hearted person. However, I did also think that there was like, I don't know if the film was trying to critique it, but I know I was in my mind. There does seem to be sort of a lens through like, no matter how good a colonizer is, like a colonizing power is, there's just a limit to how like good you can actually be, because it's very clear when he's talking to and about the Fremen that yes, he wants to form an alliance with them. He doesn't want to be like a violent, oppressive presence on their world, but he is still going to go, like he's still going to go and act as a colonizing power there. And B, when he's talking to them and talking about forming this alliance with them, it's kind of like he still sees them more as like a resource.
As in, yeah.
Like he's like,
asset.
yeah, like, oh, you know, this will be good for us. Like this will be profitable for us. Like we'll be more powerful because we are working with you guys. It's not like, oh, I honor and respect your culture so much. It's like, no, this is a smart strategic move. And so I feel like it's a good way to try to debunk like the kind slave master kind of argument, you know, like the idea that because a person has like some sort of moral standing that they can be beneficial while partaking in such an oppressive structure. And it's like, no, like they can't. Maybe they can be less harmful. Like maybe you can argue that Leto Atreides would have been less harmful as a leader than the Harkonnen. However, you cannot argue that he's good for them.
That's a really good point, because when he's talking to the Fremen, they, as honorable as they see him as an individual, they see what he represents as just another oppressor coming in and doing the same thing, right? He is still attracted to the idea of power. They made it clear that in a number of instances, the other houses across the galaxy, they look to them for guidance. While he may not like the move of having to leave their home and moving to Arrakis, he's already thinking about ways strategically to sort of bolster his like sort of defense and his economy, right? He keeps saying things like, oh, like desert power. So he's already thinking of this from an economical standpoint, and he's bringing up all of these ideas that you would be seen as sort of like progressive, but for the Fremen, they're like, nah, you're still exploiting the land and our resources, and you're still attached to a system that is still oppressive, regardless of how good you may think you are. So I can never see you as different, even though you probably see yourself as different. There was one character that I thought was pretty interesting, the human computers. When the Emperor sends his people there to Leto and his people, Leto asks that assistant, how much did it cost for the Emperor to send all this? And the gentleman starts to do the math in his head. So those human computers, from what I sort of read on the history, there's like a great revolt that happens in mankind where humanity sort of revolts against artificial intelligence, and there's like a crusade against computers and machines and conscious robots. One of the things that they sort of land on are those human computers, because that was their way of still trying to advance technology in somewhat of a moral and ethical way. That's a really good way, in my opinion, of Frank Herbert trying to, almost ahead of his time, he's telling us that this could be seen as a representation of there is value in advancing technology. But if you remove the ethics and the morality in your pursuit of better technology, then that won't be better for humanity. Right. And we've sort of seen moments of that even in our modern age right now, of like, there's conversations of AI removing jobs, or there's ethical, components happening with artificial intelligence when it comes to things in certain fields, in certain jobs. And, there's bias that comes into the coding, and what does that look like? And there's questions of like personal data. Like we saw instances where AI was able to access like private information. Those guardrails aren't as clear, and there aren't like real serious conversations to like have some form of oversight over these things. This is something that has to matter regardless of how advanced the technology is. Sounds like it got to the point where things got extremely alarming with where technology was going, and that's what they landed on, where there's still technology, there's still advancements, but it's still centered on humanity. Like he's literally the embodiment of that.
The other thing that I like, that I'm excited to see where it goes, I don't think this is a spoiler because like I don't know anything that's happening, but like I still kind of know the premise of the series. So I like where they're heading with like turning the idea of like the chosen one on its head. Like even in this film, the question is already there of like, is he actually the chosen one? Or are all of these things that people are noticing about him and how they align with the prophecy, are they noticing those things because somebody else came before him and kind of already put it in their heads.
Yes.
To me, that brings up interesting questions of like, is he wrong? He's not the chosen one and there's a different one? Or does being the chosen one actually just mean this? Like, you're the chosen one because people think you're the chosen one so much. And so they kind of it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, they force this thing into fruition. Like, they force it to be true.
Yeah.
When like, maybe they wouldn't have thought any of this and none of this would have happened had like the Bene Gesserit not come forward and started spreading all of these things. Because there's all these moments with all of these people where they're saying things like they're clearly quoting the prophecy. They're saying like when he wears the suit and she's like, he will know your way, like he was born to them or something, right? Like, you know, everybody is quoting these things because they're noticing things about him that they're like, oh, this kind of seems like you're it. To me now, knowing what we know, none of it feels like prophecy. It feels like people have been intentionally like trying to force this thing along, like from his birth. Like, his mom was literally like, I am going to give birth to the chosen one. Like, make sure that I have a boy. They said like, we've been crossing bloodlines. We've been doing all this stuff for like decades or centuries, like trying to force this into fruition, which is like not actually how prophecy usually works. Like, the way that we think about prophecy is not like something that we force to happen. It's like, you know, it's a naturally occurring thing. Like in Harry Potter, when he was the chosen one, it just happened. Like, it was just him. And she even says it was almost Neville Longbottom. And then it wasn't. It turned out to be him. So like, it's just a completely different way of even talking about that idea. And I'm excited to see the ways that it critiques it and the dangers of it, because it's such a commonly reoccurring theme in like almost all of our sci-fi. Honestly, like, I can't think of any sci-fi fantasy right now where there isn't, like, you know, you have Neo in the Matrix, you have Luke Skywalker, you have Harry Potter. Like, even if they don't use the phrasing, it's like an implication of like, this person just happened to be like the right place, the right time, like the right combination of skill sets. Like, only they could do this. Only they are capable of doing this. And it's like this magical, like, coincidental thing that just happens. But here it's like, no, we've been strategically trying to make sure that this happens. And so that kind of throws into question the whole idea of like, is it prophetical at all?
This sort of brings up 2 points. I guess the point I wanted to respond to what you're saying, and then I think something that ties into what I wanted to get at that were very similar. I think if you were to look at this from the lens of evangelicals in this country, the things that they have been able to create and produce and overturn over the last few years, you have many predominantly white Christians who look at that and say, this is God finally like opening and answering this prayer and bringing this prophetic vision into fruition. When in reality, it was really a coalition of religious leaders getting in bed with political leaders, sort of navigating over the last several decades to create this culture that we have right now. Like what Reagan does in introducing this new voting bloc of evangelicals in the 80s, that's not God moving. That's a president making a very intentional decision there. And I feel like the cognitive dissonance that you see a lot of the characters in Dune sort of display there feels similar to what I see a lot of evangelicals have right now. This kind of brings up the point that I really want to get at was Paul has this line where he says they see what they've been told to see. And that line stuck with me because obviously we both grew up religious. We both grew up as Christians. And the whole idea of like signs of the time and like the end is near and Jesus is coming are all sort of centered on these ideas that we have been socialized to see as either good or bad. In my experience growing up, when LGBTQ plus people were making progress in society, that was seen as something prophetic. Oh, this means that like Jesus is coming soon because look how bad the world is getting. I only believe that because I was taught that. You know what I mean? There were people who made that intentional decision to associate certain things socially with a religious prophetic sort of story. You see very similar lines being drawn there. Obviously, you had people in the Bene Gesserit orchestrating this behind the scenes. And because they're orchestrating it behind the scenes, they can dictate the signs of the times. They can dictate the signs of the prophecy. There's nothing organic or natural about that. But these people who have been taught that religion don't know it. Christianity has taken very similar steps, not just in America, but around the globe, to ensure everyone sort of having similar ideas of what signs are supposed to look like and how those signs are supposed to be tied to Christ's second coming. And I thought they did a really good job at displaying that, like, this is all kind of man-made to an extent.
I have a question though, because does something being man-made make it less? Because, okay, like with your example of like evangelical Christians, I agree, like the things going on there, that's not God moving.
Sure.
However, I feel like people say similar things, especially Black Christians say similar things. I wrote
that down too.
About like what's happened with Black people in history.
Yeah.
And, you know, the way that, you know, Black people were able to survive through and overcome slavery and then survive through and overcome Jim Crow. And like you could kind of say the same thing there of like, this was not accidental. This was like a series of very intentional choices that people made every step of the way to make sure that this happened at some point in time. Like people just kept pushing for it until it happened. Does that take away from the divine nature of it?
I don't know. I know at one point, like MLK used to say like the universe bends towards justice, which feels kind of aligned to the idea of like there's something happening behind the scenes sort of moving society in a direction. And then there's also people on the ground making it so. I don't know if I have an answer to that, but I do think that Dune does a really good job at showing you what religion looks like, between like the difference between how oppressive groups see religion and how the oppressive group sees religion.
The other thing that's interesting though is that the Bene Gesserit, they're moving alongside the empire and the emperor on surface level, but all of this work with Paul is a deviation from that. That's not in alignment with the oppressive power.
I think they're the real power in the story though. To me, I see that as, I don't think religion and government is like a natural coalition. I think right now we see religious leaders using government as a means to an end, to a goal that may not look the same with how government is currently structured right now. I think the Bene Gesserit would like to see someone like Paul that has the ultimate kind of power so that they can monopolize on what power looks like on the entire galaxy, which to me feels very aligned with how we see Christianity operate right now. That's sort of how I've seen things.
So why do you think that that's, because to me, the way that they're describing him right now could go either way. Because how they describe him, she says a bridge between past and future, a bridge between time and space, and like leading us into a better future. And we don't know what their definition is of a better future. Like, could it be the same as the Fremen? Like, we don't know.
Whatever plans that they had with bloodline to bloodline, I don't think Paul's mom and Leto was part of that. And that felt like a deterrence to their plan. To
me, it sounded like they were like, we've been doing this in hopes that it would happen as a result of our efforts, but not because somebody chose to do it. What she says to her is, she's like, you had like the pride or the arrogance to believe that you could give birth to the, whatever they call him.
Her making that choice and having a child with Leto, and they ended up getting Paul. I think that was an intentional choice. And I also think part of why it happened was because of what they had been doing for several centuries.
Okay, see, I feel like the implications of that conversation were, it wasn't that it just so happened. As a matter of fact, we don't even know if it did happen yet. In the words of the lead Bene Gesserit lady, the truth sayer, whatever, she had the arrogance to think that she could be the one to give birth to the chosen one. So she forces herself through whatever magic to have a son, and then raises him up in the way of the Bene Gesserit. Like, she's intentionally making him fit the mold. And so I don't even think it's like he just happened to be. I think she is forcing it. because he even says when he overhears the conversation, he's like, so like basically he says like, so everything about me is just strategy.
Yeah.
Like I've just been like this long plan of strategy that you've been orchestrating this whole time. Like nothing about me just happened to be nothing, you know? So I feel like that's the issue, is like you're forcing this to happen and they're doubtful. They're like, we don't even really know for sure if this is really him. But now that you've brought us here, now we have to play this out and see. So then she goes and she's like, all right, I'm going to Arrakis and I'm laying it out for you. I'm making it easy for you to see if this is really it or not. But I don't think that they wanted it to look like this at all. To me, it feels like they wanted it to be a little bit less forced.
Yeah. Okay. I see that. That makes sense. What do you think the Bene Gesserit's plan would look like in the end with no interruptions?
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you know, just kind of.
I don't know. So what I kind of thought they were thinking is like we're meddling, right? Like we're meddling. We're trying to be involved. We're trying to hasten this up. And so we think by crossing these people, like whatever, somebody will be born and that they will actually just happen to be the chosen one. Not like what Paul's mom did, like something that's actually chance, but it's a result of our efforts. I'm not convinced like he's even having visions. Part of me is even like, are you having visions actually, or is like some other power like feeding this information to you and making you think you're having visions? I just have questions. I have questions that call into question other things that we said about like his power and his like, I don't really know. I'm not convinced right now like this is you. I'm not convinced right now this is like him making this stuff happen. I kind of feel like he's being manipulated by something else. Now, it could be the Bene Gesserit. I don't know.
It's the reason why I have really loved Dune so much, and I'm super excited for the second one, is, I love Star Wars, I love Marvel, but the last couple of years, it has felt like there is a bit of like a monopoly that they've had on not just pop culture, but in theaters and in spaces for film and television. This feels very refreshing to be able to tap into something new, to give myself a chance for escapism in a different lore. For a while, it felt like everyone was sort of having to read and watch the same thing, and there was never space for anything else. But now I feel like we can finally get something else for people to really enjoy, especially it being one of the pioneers in this field. And with that, we will see you all next time. Peace out.